Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast, where every week we hear an amazing story from a serious founder who built a valuable software company and did it without big funding. This week, my guest is Michael McAllister, the founder and former CEO of the CE Shop. CE as in continuing education for real estate professionals here in the United States, and now into the training and certification prep for this regulated industry. Michael bootstrapped this company, grew it steadily and pretty healthily for over 15 years before selling it in 2021 during COVID for a nine-figure exit. He can't say exactly how much, but it's well into the more than $100 million exit game. So it's a big win from a bootstrap founder, and Michael is really wise. There's tons of gem insights here for practical founders about how to think about the business and culture and selling and stair-stepping their way into a bigger business and selling the company too, most importantly at the end there. So that's a great interview with Michael McAllister. And we're live with Michael McAllister. Hey, Michael, welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast.
Thanks, Craig. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we've talked a few times, and what a fun conversation. You built a really big company. You sold it for a really big amount, and now you're on the other side of all that, looking back after a long journey. Maybe I called you old there. What are you doing these days in Denver after a long journey with your company and, looking back? What do you do these days?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you to everybody who's listening, especially those that are on the entrepreneurial journey, because it's the ride of a lifetime. Really, it'll be 4 years this coming December since we did our majority recap, and it's kind of hard to believe the time warp of time. But for me, it's been a lot of kind of unwinding the professional persona in determining who's Michael McAllister without the mask or the persona of the entrepreneur, CEO, et cetera. So
we have that, don't we?
Yeah, just really been enjoying life. Tons of travel and lots of, fun activities and just really soaking in the fruit of what we've created.
Well, we usually end the conversation with that, but let's start there. Like, is it what you thought it would be? And is it worth it? I don't know. Those big questions. Let's just dig in there.
It's funny. I don't know that
struggle with it. We're entrepreneurs and we're used to the game. So
I get it. And I think that goes to what I was alluding to relative to what I'm doing now. And that is kind of unraveling, tossing off the layers to understand who's at the core, what was there. But, I don't know that I ever really anticipated what it would be like. I was so in the game and focused on building and building and building and creating value and nurturing the team and taking care of customers and just so engulfed in the journey that I never really had an expectation of what it would be like. I did always think that once you achieve financial freedom, everything else is good.
Yeah.
And what I've learned is that once you achieve financial freedom, it takes the edge off of everything else. It makes everything else just a little bit easier. But life has a way of throwing new hurdles and new challenges and new obstacles your way. So I do think, though, that building a great business prepares you pretty well for the post game, if you will.
Right. Well, it sounds like you're doing some deep work, on Michael McAllister. And it's funny, I meet a lot of young entrepreneurs and I say, I've been doing this a long time and I'm still working on it. And they're a little surprised, like you achieve something and then you don't have things you have to overcome and negative thoughts you have to work on and, all that crud.
I don't know that we ever arrive. If we just put it that way. I mean, there's always another layer of learning, another layer of realization, and another layer of getting to know yourself too. And I think that one of the most valuable things an entrepreneur can do is during their journey to be very cognizant of learning about themselves and being their true self. I think there's a tendency I think there's a lot of imposter syndrome out there, just kind of in the world in general, but certainly as an entrepreneur, I know there were phases where I thought I had to be everything, know everything, do everything, be the Superman of the game. And as soon as we realized what I was really good at and focused there and then brought on amazing people, it's amazing the momentum that you can create. So,
well, that is a specific phase of the journey, somewhere around 5 or 10 million for modern SaaS companies. You get the leadership team and then you 1.0 and then CEO 1.0. And then you realize, there's a different game up here. CEO's different, and I hire people who are different than me. And the whole chemistry of the leadership team, you've been through that. You grew a sizable company here. You said a majority recap, which is another way of saying you sold most of the company to private equity type owners, investors, and you're no longer in the business. You're probably attending board meetings. You still own a piece of the business, or did you sell the other?
Yeah,
Okay.
we did a deal with a private equity firm out of Chicago. Terrific bunch of professionals. I don't have the challenging private equity stories that a lot of people do.
Oh, great.
And that they were good people. They didn't overlever the company. I sit on the board. I'm still the largest shareholder outside of the private equity firm. So I have a lot of interest, but I'm not operationally involved, which is another nuance or something to get comfortable with. You know, when you're used to being in control and leading and being very in charge of the outcome, or at least can be accountable for the outcome. And then when you step away and you're not operationally involved, but you're still financially involved, it's a totally different game. I often refer to it as kind of business 2.0. We built an incredible business from zero. In 2005, we started with my business partner and I each put 50 grand in the bank, and we continued to put more and more money in over the years. But we ultimately, at the end of 2020, sold the business at a really, really phenomenal multiple. We're an e-learning company.
Those were the days, Michael.
Yeah. I mean, it was amazing. Interest rates were zero, and we had a really, really successful 9-figure exit that was really rewarding for everybody involved. Right. And the business has continued to grow. It's continued to do a great job, a little slower than anticipated, but there were a lot of different circumstances that have come into that. But we've got great leadership in the company, the private equity firms, solid and committed. We've got an awesome board. I feel great about it.
Yeah. So you built a company for 15 years as the founder or co-founder and CEO and led this thing. And you say a 9-figure exit. I know you don't talk publicly about how much the company was valued at or how much was invested, but I guess you're saying it's over $100 million and probably quite a bit over. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was an incredibly rewarding exit for everybody involved.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, congratulations on that. And then just for most of the exits here, this is something I have to explain to founders, which is most of the exits these days are coming from private equity owned strategic growth equity, where you're getting a 2 bites exit. You sold most of the company and you still are owned, and eventually sometimes that'll sell and maybe you'll roll some more. It's a new format, the old strategic exit where they paid you out in cash and said, thank you very much, goodbye. And you're still slightly involved there. But that was a massive exit. And how many employees did your company have when you sold it?
We had about 130 at the time of our exit.
Okay.
Yeah, we had absolutely amazing team. This was, into COVID. We had a lot of a very large virtual team based in Denver, but we had about 130 team members. Since the time that we did our deal, we have done 4 acquisitions. And some of those acquisitions have required additional capital calls. So it's kind of funny. One of the reasons we decided to do the sale of the business was we were so heavily invested in the business. You know, all of our personal wealth was tied up there. Yes. And obviously that was kind of like letting the pressure release valve out when we were able to breathe and, realize some of the fruits of our own labor and reinvest those differently. But through those series of acquisitions, we've had, additional capital calls. So it's funny, the financial advisor that I have is like, Michael, you're almost sort of, you're heading back in the direction you were before because we keep reinvesting. But it's great. I mean, it's a business that I love. It's an industry that I love. It's infinitely scalable from a vertical market perspective. It's just it's heavily regulated. So there are a lot of barriers to entry. We have some pretty strong moats around us. So even with the advent of AI and some of these advanced technologies, we feel pretty rooted. You don't build a business like the CE Shop, which is now called Career Certified. There's an umbrella organization called Career Certified, which holds the various brands that we've acquired. You don't build a business like that overnight, and you don't do it through automated technology. It's a very long, regulatory heavy business, which was part of the reason we commanded the value multiple that we did, because, you can't do it overnight. So it was really kind of a long plotting kind of process. This was not an overnight. Yeah. Very practical.
Yes. Compounding, and profitable too. You were a pretty profitable company in the end here.
Took us a while. I was looking back through some financials as I was thinking about the journey, and it took us about 5 years to get to, a cash flow place where we could, so we were continuing to chip in cash pretty regular basis. until we reached a cash flow perspective. And then we were ultra conservative. We really didn't pull any cash out of the business. We kept reinvesting in product, people. So that, just very conservative, kind of willing to play the long game.
Yeah.
Knowing that for every dollar we reinvested, there was a pretty hefty multiple of value that we were going to create.
Yes, it's great ROI when you say, if we just double it and the multiples go up and, the baseline goes up and it's worth even more. That's pretty exciting.
Well, that was always the conversation, Greg. It was fascinating because it was like, we got approached pretty early by a really large mega player in the industry to acquire us. It was actually after the great financial crisis. They had pulled back out of the industry because they were so big and public. They kind of pulled in during a time when the real estate industry was being beat up. But we were bullish. We were young, clueless, if you will, had nothing to lose. So we went after it and we stole a whole bunch of their market share. And they came to us wanting to acquire us afterwards, kind of buy back what they lost. And, there was always just this conversation whenever an opportunity would come, be like, but we have more in us. We have more we can do. We have more that we can create. And I think as long as you've got gas in the tank and you're passionate about the business, why not? Keep going, right?
Yeah. And there's no clock ticking like there is in VC funding land to pay back investors if it gets too long and so forth. So several founders I know, and I've taken up this word, they call it procrastinating the exit or procrastinating funding, right? I could, but I'll see what happens later. Yeah. And you end up in a very different place. We've gotten all this way, Michael, without explaining what exactly the CE shop was, and what it turned into under your watch.
Sure.
It's not exactly a traditional SaaS company. You might have said it's a little e-learning with content and so forth, but you talked about real estate and the regulated certifications and licensing and so forth. Tell us what the CE shop was as it grew big.
You bet. So I was a spreadsheet geek when I was looking for a business that I wanted to get involved in. I had a tech sales career primarily. I was really fortunate to be with some just incredible entrepreneurs early in my career that helped me craft the vision and recognize that I was capable of creating whatever I wanted to. So I had found a business model that I was interested in and essentially created that. It was all the things that I want. And this is actually a tip probably more for people wanting to start a business than those already engaged. But it was, all the criteria for what I thought was important across the top of the spreadsheet and then the opportunities along the vertical side. And I would rank them. Things like I didn't want to have a lot of working capital. I didn't want to be locked into a physical location. All the things that were important to me. And this business model fit it. So what it's real estate licensing education online. So every state in the United States has different rules for how to get your real estate license and how to maintain your real estate license through continuing education. So it's really like 51 different businesses when you look at 50 states in Washington, D.C. And there's a regulatory process to be approved as a school, to have your coursework approved in every single state. So there's multiple steps in each state by product. So if you want to be licensed, you take pre-licensing education. That's usually 40 to 300 hours, depending on the state.
So that's online courses, a learning management system, and your content that you built, and some worksheets and some tests and quizzes. And that world. Right.
Yeah. But what I loved about it and where you were going, it's not a typical SaaS, was that I recognized, and this was actually a business that I was looking at evaluating buying before I started this one. And they were in the distance learning, regulatory licensing space in one singular state. And they were doing everything via mail order. So they would literally print booklets, mail them out. Yeah. People would fill out an answer sheet, fax it in. I mean, it was this very manual process. And I was coming from the tech world. I thought, you've got to be kidding me. Like, let's wrap the internet around
that. Was the 80s and 90s and before.
Let's scale it.
And then it had drifted into the 2000s and, people like, let's go online. Yeah.
This was 2004 when I had run into this. So anyway, couldn't consummate a deal there and grateful that it didn't work out. But I loved the model, this idea that you could create a piece of coursework one time and you could sell it infinitely with zero additional cost of goods sold. So that's kind of this idea.
Very SaaS-like, very software.
Very SaaS-like, right?
Yeah.
So we grew that and we started in real estate. I grew up in a single parent household. My mom raised three of us here in Denver as a real estate broker. She worked her tail off to take care of three small kids and provide a nice living for us. And set the entrepreneurial example. It was actually kind of I call it an informal family business when we were growing up, because we were out, delivering flyers and brochures around the neighborhood, probably before, certainly in today's world, they wouldn't send their kids out at the age at which we went out to deliver flyers and brochures, but, taught us a lot. So anyway, it was a real estate licensing education business, and we grew it from our very first state in Michigan. I remember they had their first license renewal in 2006. I started this in 2005. So we geared up for October 31st, 2006. That's when 70,000 licensees in Michigan were renewing their license. And so
there's a recurring element that you just don't take the test and you get certified. You have to recertify every year to some extent, relicense.
Every state's different, everything from every year to every 4 years. Again, that's another one of those unique nuances. So every single state has their own particular process and flavor and number of hours and curriculum requirements and all those things. So we started with Michigan. And one of the key things I wanted to point out that I think is really important for practical founders as they get going is not trying to tackle the entire pie if you don't need to. So for example, it can be a little overwhelming when you're starting a business to think about all the different components of a business, from product development, the technological end of things, sales, marketing, fulfillment, customer support, the whole life cycle. So what we did was we went in and we said, okay, let's learn the sales and the go-to-market model. So we actually wholesaled content. This was back in the form of, when we first started, we wholesaled booklets, CD-ROMs, and online courses. So on our website, you could choose your delivery modality, and then we'd ship the materials out, just like this company that I'd looked at, receive them back. So we didn't have to do the whole curriculum development, LMS, learning management system, which is a huge component of a business like this. But
was this like a book or workbooks kind of thing? Or?
Yeah, it was actually the large national competitor that I mentioned before. They had a wholesale division that they would sell their course materials to brick and mortar real estate.
You sold their course materials?
We sold their course materials. They would private label them for real estate schools. So it was a great way to get started because, we could wholesale the content and the LMS, and we could focus on, how does our website work? What's our customer acquisition strategy? How do we support the customers? How do we build relationships with regulators? Because you still had to submit their coursework to get approved for your school. So we kind of looked at the whole, like if you look at our business, the CE Shop and what's career certified today at the regulatory licensed in education, to start that from scratch is a monster. There's so many different parts and pieces to
the moat. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And now obviously, well, not obviously, but it's all proprietary. It's all owned. It's all our secret sauce. But that's taken a long time to get there. So one of the suggestions or just tips that I would give is figure out what parts you can kind of outsource or partner with just to learn the critical components of your model. And for us, it was really the go-to-market strategy. Like, how do we reach this very scattered audience of licensees that need this product in the most efficient way where we can generate enough of a return on those marketing dollars to fuel the rest of the business? Because that led to quickly realizing that the content wasn't great. We weren't getting great reviews. It was expensive. So we were paying a pretty hefty wholesale cost to do this. So it didn't take us long to say, you know what, we really need to develop our own content. We really need to develop our own learning management system. But we were able to build some confidence and some momentum in the go-to-market that then helped fuel the development of those other pieces.
Well, it's a little bit, I know this is not quite just software and you use it like you use a CRM or something like that. It's software, the LMS, and you log in and so forth, but there's a content element and testing and maybe submitting the tests or something like that. But it's a little bit like some founders, they get up and running and start selling with off-the-shelf software. We didn't build the thing. We're using some things. We put it together and maybe there's a little people involved that, move data from here to there just to prove that something is sellable. And of course, in the software industry, people spend too many years and too many millions trying to build software. And they get out and realize, it's the go-to-market stupid, especially where like literally the content is regulated. It isn't like you're not coming up with magic new content. I guess I'm better presented.
Pretty prescriptive.
Yeah,
pretty prescriptive. The key with that though is it's very not sexy to do it that way. Like I can tell you stories.
Yes.
My husband and I have been together for 23 years.
Oh, great.
So he's been with me through this whole journey, and we laugh about it all the time. I set it up so that my phone would get a text message every time we got an online order.
Yeah.
So initially it was like, a few pings here and there. And then pretty soon it was getting pretty active. But every time I would have to go home or log on and fulfill orders because you had to take the information from one system and plug it into another system. But I'm so grateful that I had that experience because you learn the customer journey, you learn the things that are working and not working. But just, be forewarned, it's not sexy to do it this way. But again, as a practical founder, as a bootstrap guy, I mean, that's just what you do, right? I mean, it's not going to be pretty, but as long as there's a good customer experience, that's really all that matters.
Well, in this, I want to get involved helping sell the education and the training for these real estate licensing certifications. That probably didn't even occur to you to go raise VC funding or even angel investors. Like this is just a cool distribution business that turned into something else and eventually was kind of, like everything turns into a tech business. But, you probably didn't even occur to you to raise outside funding at some point.
It really didn't. I'd worked my whole career and done a little bit of real estate investing to create seed capital for going out on my own. So, and I knew that any outside party that I would bring in, including my business partner, was dilutive. So it's always this trade-off of what am I getting in addition to the dollars for that dilution. And it was never really in any interest at the beginning.
Yeah. Tell us about your business partner. Was that a co-founder that had skills that you didn't have or?
Terrific guy. We actually met through a dinner group. A group of couples got together for sushi once a month. And Ken and I would always sit next to each other and just talk shop.
Yeah.
Ken's 10 years older than I am, and he has a legal and CPA background. I'm more of a product sales guy. And we just got to know one another and decided, he was interested in investing in a business and I was interested in operating a business. So we really started out and he did back office stuff for us. He did my financial statements. If we had legal work that needed to be done, he would do that. We'd talk strategy, but I was the operating partner. I was the one out front every day, pushing, driving the machine, but a terrific guy, super supportive. He joined the business after 8 years after I had a failed attempt at hiring a company president. We were growing. I needed some help. We were building a team and I hired a gentleman who turned out to be pretty much a train wreck right out of the gates. And so Ken and I were having one of our regular calls. I was kind of licking my wounds a little bit and kicking myself for this bad hire, as we've all done. And he said, well, I'm kind of in between projects. What would you think about, me coming on as your company president and helping you out? And it took me about 2.2 seconds to be like, deal, you're done. Because we'd worked together for 8 years. We understood each other. We had good street cred. I knew he had some good operational background, et cetera. So it was fun. And then, he was with me through the remainder of the journey till the exit.
Goodness. Well, let's go back to those early days. You said there's an opportunity here. Maybe this is one of those things where you could see where technology was going and deep in these vertical markets, they were 10 years behind and you wanted to apply that and it met your criteria for these high margin, recurring revenue businesses and things like that. Is that what got you going? And then you started marketing this stuff? Maybe it was direct mail and you buy list or something or?
Absolutely. My background was in the internet service provider world. So I understood the recurring revenue, subscription revenue kind of idea, build it.
Yeah, before most of the software industry did back then in the early 2000s.
Way before. This is when we were running around town selling T1s for $1,800 a month to average business.
That's what you got.
But so basically the real estate education industry was just super antiquated. It was all delivered via classroom, brick and mortar environments. And they were great, big, huge textbooks about this big that people would immerse themselves in for 2 weeks.
Per state.
Per state. Totally. Yeah. Each state. So there's a certain amount of what we call national curriculum that kind of runs all the way through, what is an easement kind of content. And then there's always state specific laws relative to agency and ownership and all those kind of unique state by state nuances. But it was just categorically delivered in a very antiquated way. And CE, continuing education, was the easiest place to get in because the courses were 1 to maybe 6 hours long, where pre-licensing education, you were committing to 30 to say 300 hours worth of coursework. So that's what the CE
continuing education, the one slice of that licensing education.
Exactly. So we started with CE. We built a library of CE courses that you could mix and match and add on to. We actually built a really unique LMS that allowed us to deliver that core, what I'd call national content. But then
LMS is the learning management system. You log in, it shows you what you've done and quizzes and all that normal stuff.
Yeah. Learning management system. It's an online portal. It guides the learner's journey. It's all the content is pushed through that. But this was one of our special sauce, if you will, is we built a learning management system that would allow us to manage the content. So let's say there was a fair housing course where there's national federal fair housing law that every state, but then certain states have different modules and protected classes and things that they add on. We figured out how to develop coursework where you develop it one time, but then it could kind of modulate based on where the student was coming from.
Right.
So this was super progressive because nobody in the space had done it. We came in totally out of nowhere. It was dominated by big national players who did everything online in the classroom. And what they did do online was simply putting these big fat textbooks online in text.
Yeah.
And as adult learners, we don't learn by reading text online. That's
especially not real estate.
No,
go get it.
Especially not dull as dishwater content, right? So, we started in CE and we got to a national level with that, meaning we had continuing education in all 50 states in 2013. So it took us.
So that was a few years, 2005 to you did the statewide marketing game, go sell these, deliver, start to build your technology, and you bootstrapped that. So you sold ahead of investing in your technology, building 100%. Out a course, improving this thing, more digital marketing and so forth. And meanwhile, you're expanding each state as you're going here.
State by state. There was a total TAM, a total addressable market by state. And we would look at, how big is the market compared to what is the cost of developing content in those states. Anyway, so probably rewinding back a little bit. So we started in 2005 and direct mail was really our go-to-market, because this was before a lot of online marketing was even happening. And you could buy lists of licensees because it's public information, and we direct market those people.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting about it, I mentioned earlier, there was a renewal cycle of somewhere between 1 to 4 years. So the data you were buying was 1 to 4 years old, and it's a relatively transitory industry.
Yeah.
So, you're buying a list that's say 3 or 4 years old, you're going to get a diminished return of people coming back to complete their continuing education. But what happened in the great financial crisis was that we began to see our ROI on those marketing dollars go down pretty dramatically to a point.
Well, everybody was in real estate in 2005. And then in 2008, 9, 10, nobody was selling anything. Boom.
Right. The market completely hit Control-Alt-Delete. That's when the big players checked out, big real estate education players. And so we had to completely retool our go-to-market strategy. And that's when we launched our channel strategy. So we had our direct to consumer. And this was actually going to be our B2B to C. So a real estate licensee really is a consumer. So we were selling
a person,
B2C,
right? A business person. Right?
Yeah. They're all independent contractors. They're all responsible for their own licensing. So we did in 2008 and 9. I hit the road. I went out and I said, how can we sell our product if we don't know who's renewing their license? Like, these lists are worthless. Well, we knew there were real estate brokers out there with active agents in their firms, and there were also real estate associations. The National Association of Realtors, everybody's heard of because they do, national housing forecasts, and they're very active in the community. But there are 1,500, or there were at the time, local associations. So each community had their own real estate association, realtor association. Well, so what we did is we created a program where we would go to the Denver Metro Association of Realtors and we would say, okay, we've got this catalog of online classes. We will co-brand it with your brand and we'll do a revenue share. So you know who's active on your roles. You know who's paying you dues, who's active in the business. We have the content. We have the learning management system. We have all the regulatory approvals. And most of these associations are very light in personnel resources and budgets. So we basically brought them a whole new revenue stream. It's what they called non-dues revenue, where they could sell online courses. They could appear to be super progressive and have this great content, but it was all branded to them, and we would do a revenue share. So I spent quite a bit of time putting that program together and then hit the road. I took a 3.5+ week trip through Ohio and Michigan and Indiana, hitting every single realtor association out there and brokerage firm of size and signing them up. So this was the great financial crisis came along and completely stopped us in our tracks as to how we were going to market, had to reinvent. And then me as the CEO and founder, I hit the road. I mean, I was the lead sales guy. I went out and closed all these deals, and that's since turned into, 5,000 plus partners and huge part of our business today.
This week's podcast is sponsored by my friends at Cypress Growth Capital. My favorite milestone for practical SaaS founders is after you've survived the first few crazy years and you have some repeatable sales and a growing team and perhaps a little profit showing up. You know you could grow faster with a little outside capital, but the thought of raising money from VCs would change your whole game. And we know VC funding is the most expensive growth capital on the planet. That's why so many practical SaaS founders I know have partnered with Cypress Growth Capital when they hit that predictable growth inflection point. For 15 years, Cypress has provided non-dilutive growth funding to bootstrapped SaaS founders, including many of the successful founders I've had on this podcast. They love practical founders. Cypress provides enough patient capital for you to invest in your growth without giving up any of your precious equity or having to guarantee a loan personally. Their investment team has people like you who have grown and sold successful software and technology companies, and their operational and entrepreneurial experience helps them give you strategic guidance at those key inflection points in your business. So go to cypressgrowthcapital.com/practical and learn more, and contact Cliff Centel at Cypress to see if there's a fit. Now back to our podcast. So you would say that, Michael, this is a partner-driven model is what helped it scale, right? It wasn't
absolutely
Facebook advertising to realtors. Anybody who's got a software for independent realtors, real estate professionals, it's a B2C kind of thing. How do I find these people? It's so expensive and so forth. And you found a way through partners and you cut them in.
Yep. We gave them a piece of the action. We actually gave them something that they didn't have before. For brokers, realtor associations, they were really motivated by selling education. They're an education-oriented organization.
Yeah.
Brokers are more interested in recruiting and retaining. So to give them a licensing product that they can, rather than sending their prospective new agent to the local real estate school where they might get hired by another firm, we could give them this insulated learning environment where they could take that high potential recruit, push them through a co-branded learning experience, and then kind of maintain connection and content. So it was really about understanding the business motivations of these potential partners and tailoring the product to support that.
Partners are really important for a lot of SaaS companies. And as other things fade, the outbound game, the Facebook ad game, the Google ad game, all those things that you could spend money and VC money on that don't work so well anymore, partners make a big difference. But that first time a founder to go to a partner channel and imagine working with them to create new business, you actually have to get on the other side of the table and say, why would they think this is an amazing deal and want to help me? And you solved a lot of problems for, and eventually I'm sure you said, you got this problem, and I could solve it this way, and you get revenue, and it probably moved pretty quickly from there. But you have to get on the other side of the table and cut them in.
Absolutely. Understand the partner's business, their challenges. It's just like any sales game.
Yeah.
What problems are you solving on behalf of them? What are their business core concerns? Because one example of that, Greg, was, initially we started trying to offer continuing education to real estate brokers. They didn't really care because there's a lot of places that their agents could get continuing education. But what they cared about was the licensing education because their core business is in recruiting and retaining great people.
So licensing,
they didn't really pay attention.
Getting a sales-oriented kid up and running on my team.
Yeah.
as a productive real estate agent.
Yeah, they didn't really care about the continuing education. It wasn't until we could affect their recruiting metrics that they engaged with us. So the association channel was, frankly, pretty smooth and simple from an adoption perspective. But we kept going after early on. I had some incredible industry mentors that introduced me to Remax International and Keller Williams and all the big guys. Well, all they were was a license to hunt. You still had to go out and meet with all the individual franchisees and all this stuff, but they just didn't pay attention to us until we could affect their key metric. So understand really what drives your partner's business and how you and your company can support affecting that for them.
And their key metric, which is, why would this partner care? Is it really one of their key metrics that you can, in fact, change there? That's
just for a long time, I thought, well, all your agents need CE, continuing education. Okay. Why would they're like, yeah, but they can get that it's just noise for us. We're trying to build a business of talented salespeople. We need to recruit great people, and we need to keep them from getting poached during this honeymoon process.
So in your model was a marketing model. I mean, how much is a normal licensing or continuing education kind of course?
Continuing education was less than $100, probably average around $90. Pre-licensing program is probably $300-$400.
Yeah, so you can't afford to sell it or even almost get on the phone to close a deal. It's marketing driven, direct mail, come to the website. Yep. You're kind of a consumer in business, individual business people kind of shop, not a big B2B deal, $10,000 a year. Maybe you did. Could a broker who had 10 agents, could they get a deal if they?
Sure. Yeah, we put some of those deals together, particularly on the pre-licensing side of things. And they had, it depends. I mean, there were some models that came out, like Redfin was a model that came out where they actually had employees as brokers in their business. And so those things were a little differently there. But most real estate brokers took a pretty laissez-faire approach on the ongoing continuing education side of things. But I can tell you there's a warning in that too for your practical founders, in that when you identify a sales channel and you solved one of their issues, we oftentimes got pulled into trying to solve other ones that were outside of our core competency, and they were distractions. So I think
an example of one of those. That's a great thing. And founders get pulled all the time. The big customers, a big partner that has leverage. Oh, can you solve this over here?
Right.
And they want to pay you for something, but you realize years later wasn't very.
Well, it was super tempting. I mean, they had, they had skill-based training, for example, that they wanted delivered through the same learning portal as the licensing education. Well, there really wasn't a strong revenue model for that. It was massive amounts of content. It was just a huge distraction from what we could do. And it really didn't make sense. Plus, there was so much of it out there already that existed. Now, one nuance of that was we struck a deal with the National Association of Realtors to do all the continuing education crediting for their existing online courses. So a core competency of ours was compliance. Compliance was a huge part of our business. I mean, we had intimate, close relationships with all the regulators. We understood the process, and they did not, but they had all this content. They're like, we would sell a lot more of our certification programs as a national association if they had CE credit attached to them. I said, okay, well, let's work together. And so we built a partnership and some technical connections to make that happen. So I think when you're working with partners, it's to be really, really clear about what your unique skill set is and to stay in that space. Otherwise, it's way too easy just to get spread way, way out.
Yeah. It almost reminds me, Michael, of the Netflix story. And there are others like this, but it's a classic story. We were in DVDs before it was online. They knew it was going to go online, but they couldn't get there. So they started paving the roads with DVDs. And you kind of did that with your, reselling the paper, certifications and workbooks before you went online. And you started notching up, I guess, pretty steadily, like a state, and then we have this, and then we can do this. And you were making enough profit to invest in another state and build something online without having to raise money. You were ahead of the game, selling ahead of the game. But by the time the financial crisis happened, you had the ability and now the credibility across all the states and everything to start doing partnership deals and national deals, and you stair-stepped your way.
We actually ran into the financial crisis pretty early on in our journey, because we didn't start till 2005. We didn't have our own learning management system till 2007.
Yeah.
So the financial crisis came at a pretty early stage. No, we continued the direct mail marketing strategy where it would work and complement it. And it's essentially grew to like a 50% of the revenue came from partners, 50% through direct marketing. Cause I mean, it's still to today, I mean, we pay Google $1 million a month, I'm sure by now. So we still do a lot of that in order to generate the business that we do. Yeah. But it wasn't until 2013 when we had a national footprint of continuing education coursework. And we looked at each other and said, well, what do we do now? Do we go into another vertical market and do more continuing education, or do we go deeper within our existing market? And at this point, we had a good partner channel that we'd built. We'd really entrenched ourselves into the real estate space. And that's when we decided to tackle pre-licensing education. So that was a big turning point for us because we had to reinvent our learning management system to deliver long pieces of content. I actually took two members of our team and kind of sequestered them, these brilliant minds, and said, go study how adults learn best online and let's build a learning management system that does that. So we did. In 2013, we actually raised $1 million, friends and family. Oh, okay. So Ken and I continued to kick in, but we brought in a few family members, a few friends, because we had a pretty big
you got over a hump a little bit. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Right. There was a big technical lift to do. And at that point, too, we also decided to hire some additional members of the management team and kind of really get ready to grow. And that the addition of pre-licensing education was really a huge turning point for us, because up to that point, we're selling a sub $100 product. And now we're selling a product that, is 4 to 5 times that amount. And what we learned was that even though there's 2 million existing licensees within the United States that have some continuing education cycle, the really big market is the pre-licensing market, not only because of the price point, but just because there's so many new people coming into the industry every year.
The churn rate,
so that completely transformed our business. And we realized at that point, we don't need to go outside of real estate. Let's just serve this constituency from the very beginning, top of funnel when they get their license all the way through their post-licensing, through their CE, et cetera. And that's who we were until we did our recap at the end of 2020. And since that time, we've done some acquisitions into other verticals, and we've gone deeper into real estate with organically. We've built out mortgage loan originator content, appraiser, real estate appraisers, home inspections. So we've kind of got this real estate suite of products now. But since under the Career Certified brand, we've gotten into financial services, so insurance, securities.
Everything that's regulated, certifications, licensing. Each state is different. We have the infrastructure. How much technology was there? You might call this an e-learning company. We're making courses that explain these things and quiz me on this and walk me through and have little videos in there and so forth. But as many who have taken online courses, but you made your own LMS and had a whole bunch of technology and, e-commerce, to be able to sell it and so forth. Yep. Did you have a sizable software development team?
We do. That was always one of the most challenging parts of the business, I felt, because I didn't have a technical co-founder.
I see. Right.
We were business people, and, there's a million different ways to get to the same end. Ultimately, there's a million different multiple technical ways to do it. So there was a lot of learning that took place with various leaders over the time. Is it Microsoft? Is it open source? Is it Java? Is it this? I would say if there was a place where we got slowed down, it was that we didn't have a vested technical resource in plotting out a really good technical roadmap. Mm-hmm. So we were kind of all over the board. There was no real customer impact to that. It was probably just time and money that was inefficient in that. But we've since now we've got a phenomenal group of people. I'm amazed at how much technology is actually required to do this, and things have come so far. Amazon Web Services does amazing things for businesses like ours that really minimizes some of the in-house expertise that you need. So we can really focus on customer facing product functional stuff as opposed to maintaining systems and servers and all that.
When did you go through the transition from founder selling and making stuff up and that rock star team that gets you going, the startup, and, you're starting to grow? When did you get to the point where, okay, I need to be CEO. I need leaders across all the functions at about this level. We can all work together and figure this out. Did that take you 10 years to be the CEO with a full leadership team? Or
it's funny you say that, because as you were asking the question, that's 10 years. It took a decade. It really did. And it's funny to think about that reflecting back. But it was really just, we did what we could with what we had.
Yeah.
There wasn't
as a starting point, as a constraint.
It was an absolute constraint, but it was also like, I feel like we grew at a pace that worked. I don't ever remember feeling like we need more money because I want to go faster. Okay. Like things were happening at a really healthy, organic pace. For me, and I would imagine for a lot of your audience, the entrepreneurial journey is really a self-actualization journey. It's like, I felt like I grew up building this business. Like I learned so much about myself and about people and about leadership and about management. And as I look back, it really all unfolded beautifully in perfect timing. But it really was a decade until I could move into a place where it was more around leading leaders and helping them be successful, as opposed to, getting my hands dirty in the various technical parts of the business. And for me, it was a beautiful transition. I loved it. Ken was operating as company president. So he loved the nitty gritty of the operations of the business, where I was much more around strategy and culture and really creating an ecosystem. So we were kind of the yin and the yang of that whole chemistry, because we built an amazing business that was recognized as the best place to work and Colorado companies to watch and all these awards. And the other thing that was really crucial at that point when we decided to raise that little bit of capital and grow our team was we invested in HR. Like a lot of companies. And
so that was like 50 employees, Michael?
No, we were like 20.
Oh, really?
We did it super early. And we were fortunate. And then my husband had a career at John Deere. He was in global talent management. So
oh my goodness,
for the enterprise, he managed their coaching, mentoring, and career advising program. And he was taking a sabbatical. And I remember like tapping him on the shoulder saying, would you mind helping me with some interviews? It's like, sure. Well, he couldn't just help with interviews. He had to do job analysis, and, format and
look at all the things you need to do.
An interview process. And then that turned into a performance management process and a whole, we took John Deere-esque HR process into our little company. And I'll tell you, Greg, it made a huge difference. And I think that companies don't invest in those processes, which are now, there's so many great HRIS systems out there to support entrepreneurs and small businesses with this stuff. But it is so vitally important, because the people in your business, you've heard this a million times, the people are the most important thing that you have, but you have to demonstrate it by, and I think probably performance management is probably the key. People want to know what's expected of them, and good people want to deliver. But so many businesses, especially small ones, don't prioritize that. I think, that entrepreneur or the leaders of the business have a really clear expectation of what they want and what they expect, but it's oftentimes not communicated and or compensation plans tied to it. So from very early on, we were very clear about organizational objectives, departmental objectives, individual objectives. Everybody had line of sight. So every month when we do our state of the CE shop, we called it, everybody knew exactly within their job function, exactly how they affected these various metrics. And they also knew, based on how the company was performing, how they were going to be paid.
Yeah.
I
love that. And most SaaS companies and tech founders and, fast moving startups procrastinate that structure stuff as long as they can. But it's really kind of a relief that we know where we're going, and these are the most important things, and here's how it's going to be divided up, and a clear line of sight to that. It doesn't take all the excitement out, and the more people you have, the more that stuff is necessary. So,
well, it takes the gray out. Like from a management perspective, a leadership perspective, departmentally, it really takes a lot of noise out, especially in fast-growing technology businesses. There's a sense of, I don't want to say entitlement, but there is, especially among tech resources, they need to be paid. They think they're worth a lot. So we did something as simple as align to a certain salary survey software that said, okay, here's the job position in Denver, Colorado of a company this size doing this kind of revenue. Here's, the high, the low, and the mid, and we pay at 75% of the range. Period. Done. There's no more conversation about it. You know what I mean? And then we have an incentive plan that goes above that. So standardizing and formalizing some of those things as early as possible before it's just overhead,
I think it's one of the benefits of the practical founder approach, the 30% growth compounding as opposed to 100%, 200% rocket ride, is that the pace creates ability for CEOs and leaders and everybody else to grow without like the wheels coming off every 6 months, is because you just went through a growth spurt and half the people don't know what they're doing anymore and so forth. It's a kind of a reasonable pace where you can work on your business at the same time. You don't have to throw people off the bus every 2 years just because you're 3 times bigger,
Well, I think that goes into just the overall planning cycle.
Yeah.
We were doing, we always had an annual plan and then we had like a 3-year plan. We didn't get very far out. The 3-year plan never turned out to be what we thought it was going to be. And then the 1-year plan was just things were changing too fast. So we moved to semi-annual planning.
Okay.
We talked very clearly about strategy. You spend a good chunk of time on your strategy. You spend the bulk of your time on planning, and planning included, building all the process, all the hiring and the comp plans and project plans and all those things. And then so that execution is easy. We talked a lot about strategy, planning, and execution. And about strategy's got to be super clear, invest a lot of good time, extra time. This was one of the cultural things in our company. It wasn't within the standard work week. When we were planning, it was nights and it was weekends.
Yeah.
And then, but once the planning was done, man, we could hit the ground running if we could execute really, really well. And we did.
Yeah. That's actually the proof of that, of the strategy and planning and the decision making and that coordination and that extra time, and that it works is when execution moves faster. So many companies move fast, get 100 people, and then everybody's moving in different directions. It's like everybody's playing basketball in 4 feet of water. It's really slow.
Right.
And then, you take all that out and there's no discussion about what are we doing today? Did we change our mind today? Did we wait for the CEO to change our mind? So yank the steering wheel of the car.
And not try to tackle too much at any given time, right?
Well, I hear that. You had the regional expansion challenge that's unique to that industry. Also in the cannabis industry, there's different states that do it completely different.
Sure.
But most other SaaS companies don't have to deal with that. So that probably helped to manage your pace a little bit more. Let's skip forward to, selling the company. You did this for 15 years. You got over 100 employees. Headed to 130, headed towards 150. It's a sizable company in every state. Everybody knew about you, and it's getting pretty mature. Why would you consider selling a majority of your company? So like selling your company, it's not just an investor. You moved out as CEO, and maybe that happened just before that, something like that. But why would you consider that? Was that just,
Yeah, no, great question.
Time?
Great question, right? I mean, we had, a strong top line, really healthy bottom line, happy, healthy culture, infinite growth opportunity. And it really came into, we'd had a lot of suitors over the years. We started to engage with a local investment bank here, probably about 3 years in advance of us actually doing a deal. And they helped us do what I would call kind of identify our value drivers. We knew that ultimately we wanted to take some chips off the table and just kind of ease the pressure. There's some risk, obviously, right?
The bigger it is,
your eggs in one basket. And, like I mentioned, Ken was 10 years older than I was. I was, at this point, 12, 13 years into a startup, which I'm convinced is at least every year is like 2.5 years of a standard corporate
lifetime.
Career. So it's intense, super intense. But anyway, they helped us identify our value drivers. And we had a pretty robust process. This was actually in 2019. So we went to market and ended up under LOI with a strategic buyer who was private equity backed. We were going to be a third division of their current, 2-division structure. We'd already done business with these people. They were strategic partners of ours on the licensing exam testing process. So each regulator engages a third-party testing group to administer exams. And that's what this company did. And we got an amazing 9-figure offer from them. And me coming from absolutely nothing, Ken came from a similar background. We were completely blown away that we built a business that was worth what it was worth. We were going through due diligence and we were excited about we had some mixed feelings about about the process because we loved the business. We knew there was infinite growth. So it was kind of this balance of like, how far do you drive it yourself versus don't be greedy and be smart. So we're under LOI, we're doing all the due diligence, and we're, letting this buyer know that we're really interested in rolling equity forward and doing our own reverse due diligence on them. Like, what are we investing in? We want to see your financials. We want to understand your plan, your strategy, because we're not interested in totally cashing out here. Well, this company had done 12 or 13 acquisitions in the last 2 years. They were just on fire. We were the largest that had come along, and we were the only ones that weren't all cash out. So they weren't used to this idea of reverse due diligence, but we were 2 weeks before closing, and I called our banker. I said, this is really frustrating that we're asking for all this information and we're not getting it back. And I said, unless we do, we need to pull the plug on this deal. And what was neat about this, Greg, and this is what I would advise for timing on an exit, is go when you're holding all the cards.
Right.
We held all the cards. We had a great business. We didn't need to sell.
Right.
We were completely in the driver's seat. So I could comfortably go to this buyer and say, unless we start getting what we're asking for, we're out. We got to pull the plug on this deal. So lickety split, they wanted us in LA the next day or 2 days from then, because to wine us and dine us and begin to, show that they were truly going to give this to us. So Ken and I flew out there and we went with the bankers and we spent the day with them. We're kind of talking strategy and they're letting us in on their business. And at this point, I was really clear that after this recap, I needed some time. I was not interested in running the business go forward. Ken wanted to stay in. So he was at the table as the CEO going forward. And he would have been, in this case, the president of this division for them. So we're back at the airport after this whole kind of wild and crazy day. And the bankers go off to make their calls, and Ken and I go grab a beer. And I said, do you really want to work for these guys for the next 5 years? Is this really what you want? In other words, due diligence is an amazing opportunity to learn what it is that you're getting into. And you're never done. You haven't signed the deal until you sign the deal. Make sure that you utilize that period of due diligence as an opportunity for you to really be clear about what's happening, what's going to happen. So anyway, I remember we got on the plane that night, and Ken was sitting a few rows. I think he was in front of me, we were both on an aisle, and I could just see him kind of staring out like he was deep in thought. What do I want to do? What do I want to do? So we got back to Denver. Virgil, my husband, and I, and he and his wife, we all went to dinner the next night. We're kind of talking about it. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Well, we decided to pull the plug, which was an amazing.
For them.
He didn't want to do it. We didn't feel like there was a good cultural match because of this kind of standoff we had around, we had to, basically present an ultimatum at a point when we held the cards. What would happen if we needed information or wanted something when we didn't hold all the cards? Anyway, and the biggest thing for me was that there was a real mismatch in core values. Our core values were foundational to who we were and who we are as a company. And one of them was doing what we say we're going to do. Mm-hmm. And in that process, we had told our team, we were very transparent with our leadership team when we went through this recap process, what we were doing. We didn't want them to be surprised, but we let them know that there'd be an opportunity for equity in the new entity. Well, within this deal structure, we were going to be a division, and these people would have been middle managers, essentially. And that opportunity for equity would have been minor, if at all. And that was one of the deal points we were trying to negotiate. And I said, there's no way I can do this deal and feel comfortable with that. We'll be fine. Financially, we'll be fine. It's a good company, blah, blah. There's nothing wrong with the deal.
Right.
But we made a commitment to this. These are our core values, and I'm not willing to stray from that. And it was $100 million question. It was a big deal. So we ended up calling the partner, the acquirer, and saying, I'm sorry, but it's not going to work. Thank you. Yada, yada. Went back to work. We just went back to work. So, just put our heads down, went back to work. Well, this is the end of 2019. We all know what happened in early 2020. COVID came. All classroom education in the real estate industry shut down.
Oh,
completely
live classroom. Yeah.
All live classroom education shut down. So our business literally started ramping like this. I mean, unbelievable. In no time, our revenue was twice what it was before.
Oh,
so here it is. My inbox is now filling up with more private equity interest and more, investment bankers, all this stuff. And so we got to about July, and I called Ken and our banker back together, and I said, listen, guys, we need to do a deal here. We need to do a deal. We need to settle on a price and we need to go to market. And this was also when the presidential nomination was happening. Joe Biden was nominated. We were concerned about capital gains. We were concerned that if capital gains rates went up, we'd have to grow the business, this much
Still
more
happening. Yeah, right.
in order to net the same amount. So there were all these factors. So we wanted a ready, willing, and able buyer that would hit our price point and close the deal by the end of the year. Our investment bankers are awesome. They went back and they basically socialized the deal with about a dozen players who all met that criteria. We got four LOIs, all at our asking price. And the one that we consummated the deal with was the private equity firm that owned the strategic that we were under LOI with before. Because they had already invested several $100,000 in due diligence. They knew what they were buying. They weren't, afraid of what others called the COVID bump in revenue. And we closed the deal December 18th in 2020 with that player.
Well, so a couple of things there. One is you had M&A bankers that coached you through getting ready. Yep. And then you went and did a process and you finally said no, and they stayed with you. That's part of their deal. You get the right to say no if you're doing
it. Wasn't easy to tell them no either.
No, I get it. But they were with you again. Yep. Yeah, they did better. Right.
Amazing people.
Yeah. So, and they helped you through this process and got you more buyers, but you kind of went out with a price, which is unusual. Usually you go out and say, well, what's your best offer? And what do you think? And
very unusual.
An overview that's anonymous. And then here's an NDA with details. And then, what's your best price? And then the bidders and all that. So why did you go out with a price?
We basically said to ourselves, it's a wild ride. I mean, it takes a lot to decide to go to market, and then it takes a lot to go through the go-to-market process, and then the due diligence process is a lot, and then to call the deal off is a lot. And so, to get back in the game again, we're like, okay, we are going to control our destiny.
Here's the deal. Yeah.
Here's the price. If you want it, let's do a deal kind of a thing. So rather than kind of this auction process again, just set the price, set the time frame, curate a small number of buyers that we knew were ready to do the deal. Yeah.
And so did you find a cultural fit with the PE buyer that owned your previous?
Yeah, they've been great. See, they created a whole new platform within their ecosystem for us instead of, the strategic that was the platform, us becoming a part of that. So we've really been able to sculpt and design that. And frankly, as long as you're meeting the financial metrics that they're interested in, you have a lot of autonomy to create that.
As long as you're meeting the financial metrics, right? That's really important, and those
exactly.
And so forth. So let's also talk about you were getting acquired by a strategic that was private equity owned. That was a platform, and they were acquiring you into that platform. And then the second time around, you grew bigger, sold it for a bigger price, and CE Shop became the platform. Yeah.
Yep.
Which you acquired other companies into. So now it's the same format that you were considering when you started.
Yeah, our private equity partner wanted an e-learning platform company.
Right.
That's really what they were interested in. And we had all of the foundations for that. We had all the technical systems, all the go-to-market expertise. And so the acquisitions that we've done, we've bought smaller businesses like we were in the early days, where we just need to pour gas on curriculum, gas on digital marketing, bring them into what we call our centers of excellence, and then scale. It's been a blast. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. And the platform thing and this acquiring other businesses and becoming the platform and dominating and that, some companies get there on their own, but sometimes it takes that financial support and a dream of maybe someday we'll get to other industries that aren't real estate and so forth. What an incredible journey there. And
very grateful.
You don't seem to have too many scars, or Michael, you're hiding them. You got makeup all over the scars, from those days. I know it was hard and you had some brutal times and so forth, but you're either speaking lightly of the challenges you faced or, you got through them.
I think it's a combination of both, Greg. I think I was built for this.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that tenacity and grit and perseverance and the willingness to work hard are absolutely the secrets to my success.
Yeah.
I'll never go down the history books as the world's smartest Ivy Leaguer or anything like that, but I was definitely, and I'm willing to work harder than most.
Uh-huh.
And I think that it's really important not to not to forget that aspect of
Yeah.
the incredible opportunity we have to live in this amazing place that we call the United States, where
Right.
anybody can create anything that they
Yes.
want.
Yeah,
And how important it is to have a vision that you can emotionally and energetically connect with, and then also be able to communicate that so others can feel it, can feel the passion, can feel the vision. So the scars along the way were just that. I mean, they were just part of the journey. And I think it's what makes you who you are. Now, I will tell you that, I was kind of numb through it. I mean, you just get so in it. And that's really what this last 4 years has been about, is like peeling back, letting some of that stuff go to realize, it kind of did maybe take its toll. Like I might have aged a little more than my peers. But no, I mean, it's definitely, it's not for the faint of heart. It's not for everybody. But I am just so incredibly grateful for the journey, because I've learned so much about myself. I think about the impact that we've had on our teams and our communities. The foundation that we started in 2013, when we hit that national footprint CE, we added a sixth core value, which is we give back. And we started a 501c3 that feeds children on the weekends in Title I schools. And we just had our 10-year anniversary party here at the house this summer. And, we fed over hundreds of thousands of families here in Denver with meals that they wouldn't have had otherwise. So there's so much that comes from it. I mean, there's the building the product, there's building the business, there's driving revenue, making money, but the opportunity to work with really talented people and watch them grow, watch their careers grow, watch their kids grow up within the ecosystem, the opportunity to serve customers and really help them advance their businesses. I always said to the team that, a career in real estate is really one of the last few entrepreneurial opportunities that exist in our country without huge barriers to entry. Right. And that's what a lot of what we're doing is we're enabling this entrepreneurial spirit. So there were so many different angles that business can be shaped from, but I think it's got to fill your soul. It's got to light you up. If it's just simply for the pursuit of money, it's pretty empty. And I feel incredibly fortunate that I had all that. I had the opportunity to have a vision and have passion and communicate that and fill myself up. Yeah. But then also reap just amazing financial rewards that now allow me to do super cool things for my family and other people and the world at large, hopefully.
Right. Do you imagine starting another business, as let's say a majority of practical founders do, when we're wired for this, and we're not wired for sitting on the beach for too long, most of us. So, do you imagine starting a new business or starting something that keeps you passionately engaged?
I love a good startup. I mean, I just think there's nothing more magical than just bringing an idea to. I don't know that I've in the last 4 years, I've done some kind of informal mentoring and coaching of some startups, and I really enjoy that. I don't know that I don't know that I have the energy that's really required to do it, to lead it from scratch again. Now, I don't know that for sure. I would do it differently. I would have the ability to do it differently now. I don't know.
What would you
really
do most differently even if you didn't have the money? How would you approach it differently? You did a lot of things, let's say wisely, in the right order and so forth. But what would you have done differently, from your perspective, if you could have?
Wow, that's a great question. I think I probably would have taken some pressure off myself and I probably would have been less controlling.
That weight is pretty heavy, right? And it comes right out into the thing.
Yeah. And for what? It doesn't work. But that's part of a maturation process, I'm convinced. Yeah. And also a confidence building process. We would talk often about like the most critical characteristic of an entrepreneur. And I think confidence is probably right there. And so I think, it would I'd come at it from a different frame of reference now, a different perspective.
Is that like less scarcity?
Less scarcity. When you've been somewhere and done something, it's easy to not be fearful about doing it again. And I think the trick is to trust yourself and believe in yourself enough to not be afraid on your first go around. Yeah. I felt like I surrounded myself with enough of good books and people and stuff to support my journey, which is really, really important because it can be incredibly lonely, especially if you don't have I didn't have really hardly any mentors or, I didn't have a great coach like you or anybody really it was a pretty lonely process.
Yeah.
And so you break through that fear by proving over and over and over again that you can conquer it and achieve. But the first go around, you have to muster, that has to come from somewhere.
It has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. I totally appreciate that. Thanks for sharing that. Michael, what advice do you have for practical founders out there that are seeing a problem and, maybe they have never been an entrepreneur before and didn't come with a pile of money and didn't grow up around, entrepreneurs and the cool kids and so forth. What advice do you give most often to entrepreneurs who are getting started with something that could build into something, but it'll take a long time?
Well, I think an entrepreneur absolutely has to have a vision. They have to see it before anybody else sees it. They have to understand the problem that it is that they're seeking to solve, the solution they're bringing to the market. So if you're not sure about it, it's going to be tough to bring on a team. It's going to be tough to sell customers on this idea. People will see through you really quickly. So crystallize your vision, get clear on it. It's okay if it changes a little bit, but be deeply connected with whatever the current vision is and be able to articulate that so that you can inspire teams and customers and people to move with you. The other advice that I'd give is to find support, find a community, find a coach, plug into like what you've created, Greg, is amazing. I mean, if something like that had been around when I was doing I transformed.
These things really weren't around back in the old days. It was barely.
No, they weren't. They weren't. And there's so much of that now. I mean, there's so much great stuff out there. And so I would find mentors and coaches. They don't necessarily, if you can't afford to hire a coach, you don't need to, but find some other people who have been down the journey that you've been around and then really lean on them because they want to support you. Like nothing brings me more pleasure today than to have somebody come to me looking for some perspective and some guidance and a little bit of advice on something. Because we're amazed. Those of us that have been down the journey, we're amazed by actually what we know. Like it's like you don't know it until someone asks you about it. And you're like, oh, yeah, that's easy. So really surround yourself with like-minded people who have been down a path that you want to go down and then lean on them. So I think, and then just so be super clear about your vision, believe in yourself. I tell you, I think one of the hardest things is just deciding to do it. Yeah. If anybody out there was anything like me, I always gave 150% to every job I had, every employer that I worked for. And there was a point at which I thought, well, why wouldn't I just go give 150% to myself? So trust and love yourself enough to do it for you and the vision that you're trying to bring to fruition.
That's awesome. And that's a great way of saying it. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. Yeah. It's something I just super passionate about this. And I love the entrepreneurial journey. And anything that I think at this stage of our life cycle, Greg, it's important to boil down, the formula if we can.
Yeah.
So that it's not this monumental, complicated monster to tackle. It's like
it's not magic. It's hard, but it's not magic. Yep. And what I tell people is if I can do it, you could definitely do it. So,
Amen.
If you have the work ethic and you have enough commitment to it and you see an opportunity and you're keep improving.
Yeah.
And I'm still improving after all these years and still working on it.
Absolutely. I think we all are. We're always a work in progress, aren't we?
Well, I look forward to seeing what you do next, Michael, but really appreciate you sharing your story of the CE Shop and your own personal journey.
Thank you.
As the founder and CEO of that. And congratulations on their big exit. And, there'll be another one, the second bite of the apple, so-called there. So thanks for being on the Practical Founders podcast, Michael.
You bet. Thank you, Greg. And just to all of your audience, I tip my hat to you.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks for watching this week's founder interview on the Practical Founders podcast. Be sure to hit like and then subscribe to my Practical Founders YouTube channel to keep up with my weekly videos for serious software founders who are building valuable companies without big funding. Check out my blog and information about my Practical Founders CEO peer groups at practicalfounders.com. And follow me on LinkedIn to keep the conversation going. See you next week.